TV7 Israel News is made possible thanks to your generous donations. Shalom, good evening. This is TV7 Israel News broadcast to you from Jerusalem. And in today's top stories, an Egyptian brokered ceasefire has taken effect with Israel proclaiming victory.
Coming live all the way from Israel through the European channels into the broadcast here in the national and local level. We bring you today Kingdom Glory Invasion, now the Kingdom Millennial Reign broadcast on air today to give you a significant shift in the local area. Blessings here to Fort Collins, Loveland, Windsor, Greeley, and Estes Park, in the regions that hear the voice of prophecy. Today there is a mighty, mighty, mighty opportunity as we are going to share the various and multifarious levels of the kingdom. As many people have visited here in the last few months and years, as you have followed the Multiply the Fire broadcast, now we're bringing you an update to challenge you and release you all at the same time. The challenge is simply this: never, never, never strive for the future that you want to claim. Never, never strive to end political problems, to end the crisis of war, or the persecution, or the threats against local business, or the demand of criminal justice and rehabilitation that you see, such as the care of orphans in the region and the crisis that you see at times that threatens and challenges you in your diplomacy of business. You see, these kind of things are considered, which indeed is a judicial situation where you are required to make righteous choices or suffer the penalty of an unrighteous decision. But if you want to step in to a more gentler path, then it is encouraged to understand the keys of the kingdom. The keys of the kingdom that are infinitely solved into a more generous and blessed shared event, meaning accepting the royal and creative blood of the Lord Jesus spent for you 2,000 years ago, crowned with the royal cross of thorns, the thorns of the ages, to that extent, crowned equal with men's suffering to protect you against suffering. The crown of thorns that today, as he has been seen in the past few weeks, in a time of tumultuous events throughout the earth that had me in infinite amount of prayer, spending very little sleep at night, up till 1 or even 3 o'clock, on suicide watch for many people across the globe. People that were suffering infinite amount of suffering to the point that the temptations could either bring them down to a sudden visit to the ER, mental crisis, or even suicide. These events were actually felt by millions and billions of people at a critical moment in time when the Lord was presently giving dreams and visions to millions of people, even showing up throughout YouTube of dreams that pastors, even Pastor Benny Hinn, known in the nation to be a minister, a lifetime legacy of healing to the nations, was visited in a dream. And he was gloriously caught up into the sky, and he absolutely witnessed heaven and visited with Jesus and saw his wife gloriously celebrating in youthfulness. It could have been a time to stay in heaven and never wake up again. But the Lord spoke to him in his final departure from that realm and did say to him, I am returning imminently soon. Other people have decreed the same thing, having dreams of the Lord visiting the earth. And of course, if they know the interpretation of the dream and the timing, it actually happened. For many people in the West, it was unknown, as it says that he would return in the eastern sky, splitting the sky with vibrant light and lightning, depending on how much revelation you get according to the ancient text. It did say that he would be seen as far as the eye can see. Of course, many people didn't realize that Israel has had a closed public broadcast until now. A closed public broadcast because they are infinitely aware of the same thing, preparing to build the temple for the Lord's return. As you know, prophecy has been revealed, many different layers of prophecy throughout recent history. Many people in the East and the West know that Jews and Christians have been persecuting each other, and there has been a divide between Christians and Palestine, some of the last few tribes to exist on the earth, meaning these tribes have been highly persecuted and are the last to stand off for peace. But as you know, on a local level, there needs to be answers. Some of the answers are clearly evident today. As you know, the West could not have seen the splitting of the sky during the early hours of beginning of morning in Israel. Many people have seen a massive migration of Jews as the remnants are returning home, clearly declaring the end of Romans chapter 11. The fullness of Gentiles come in until the Jews are grafted back in by the multitude of prayers of the Gentiles praying for the peace of Jerusalem. As you know, Western world was working and it was noonday, and it was infinitely a different time of day when these events were ripe on early morning. We were further along in time, but at the same time, infinitely behind. The day had expanded to early morning night in Israel. Sunlight here in the Western world means only our eye could see, as far as the eye could see, what was happening at midnight, when Jesus said he would come back as a thief in the night. Meaning what? He would come back and claim Israel without the Gentiles knowing. And indeed, he would graft them in. And if you were up in the noonday, as it was the expansion of the day going forward, but the early rising of a new day, as many people were staying up in anticipation, many people did see a light and a transfiguration that came to the earth, a glorious manifestation of Christ. Things that people saw, sometimes people in the daylight of the last day coming to a close, saw in visions and dreams. During this time, I was highly tempted because, as you know, in the book of Revelations, after the 15th chapter, before this mighty return, there is an infinite hour, an infinite closure at the same time. The mark of the beast had been at its height across the world, which means value systems, laws, and systems were completely at its bittermost position. As you know, many things were happening up until this point. The beast is indeed known as the position of kings on the earth. Kings ruling over in their lordship a people beneath. An absolute system of exploitation. And a system of exploitation that the height of Eve was doubling down on the kings. The height of Eve is known as her royal position of righteousness to the point of the blasphemy of the nations. She was doubling down on the king, doubling down on the kings to claim her harvest. And then as she claimed her harvest, she loaded the banks with the merchantmen's spices and gold and all of the things that were in the bank. As she doubled down harder and resisted to pay back the kings, she became a tyrannical whore of Babylon. And this all is culminating up to the final hour. As Revelation says, they all conspired for an hour. And in their conspiracy to rule the earth, at the same time, the hour of judgment came. And in 1 hour, people saw the finality of bank closures, complete freezing of assets, as bank administrations worldwide were scrambling to reverse the order of exploitation upon the world, finding sudden halts and freezes upon them themselves as governments were pressuring them. And everybody was fearing a global meltdown, even to the intent the kings were threatening nuclear war. All across the world, this was culminating till the hour that the Lord split the sky in Israel, absolutely coming down and judging an apparition of the Antichrist in Israel, judging him to the removal of satanic darkness and illuminating at the same time the presence of the Lord in now the seated Christ. Complete transfiguration from a prodigal apparition of Christ to a submitted and revealed Christ in Israel. This absolutely transfigured the globe within 1 hour. Assets were unfrozen. Divine reversals on wealth were given. And suddenly accounts were opened. And services began once again as if nothing ever happened. People that were seeing this happen in the spirit had many visions. As I was in absolute prayer infinitely, I was seated in my chair in the garden of my home, seeing the beauty of a transfigured globe, and at the same time, the threats against what was present and coming. I then saw an apparition of the martyred Christ standing and walking through Colorado with his head as high as the clouds. If a plane were to fly at his level, they would be equal to the thorn that came out from his crown. He was that large in his apparition. He was physically and visibly seen to my naked eye. As he commanded, he said this, as an apparition of the king's lordship next to me in spiritual form as a king, he had his sword drawn to the side in a golden and white apparition of a spirit protecting me, saying if any calamity came my way, he was infinitely quick to even sever a hand from thievery against me, manifesting his spiritual sword to the cutting of physical flesh, if he had to. And then I saw the other apparition of him, a giant, if you will, giant in sight of what he was walking as across the land, a slain Christ, representing twofold, the covenant that was complete and the manifestation of the spiritual presence of the Lord's apparition to protect me, a king now seated. He spoke to me as he said many things, as he spoke to me what to do with the keys of the kingdom. I began to bind and loose infinite judgments, infinite meaning paths of no return, complete and divine reversals, and then invincibly submitted back to him as my prayers turned into golden keys that then adorned a key ring of keys in his hand. Each judgment means that he was now upholding the judgments in his royal hand of keys, the keys that he was going to unlock the prisons of the earth with, as he also represented the crown of suffering of the ages. And he said to me, my crown now holds the suffering of all people, and it is your protection on this soil and across the nations against any martyrdom that should come against you. I submitted the keys to him to then go and unlock the prisons. People like President Trump, other people that have been persecuted, the unlocking of the prisons, and the beginning of royal accord throughout the earth. Many people do not know what has been submitted as declarations of peace. I began to see drafts of a nuclear de-armament and publishing and sealing of documents in Russia, as I saw Putin sign an agreement of nuclear de-armament as he's approaching the summit in 24, the summit of a transfigured UN. Things that people are going to draft as a 7-year covenant of peace. I then saw on public news Putin's agreement with the pleas of Nigeria. The pleas of Nigeria wanting peace against Christian Ukrainians. A mighty transfiguration of Nigeria, but of course this is what God was doing in his time of visitation of the prodigal thrones of the heads of the beast. The lion was Israel and British Empire and America. The leopard was Iran. But first there was Putin's agreement as the bear and China's agreement as the dragon, coming to their complete stature of royalty to the point of blasphemy against the nations. Once you reach a certain height of righteousness, it becomes a spiritual pride and recognition for the glory of your apparition as a man and a king upon the earth. But with the denial of Christ, it becomes completely apparent. Your declaration of righteousness becomes the blasphemy of the nations. This is known as the Antichrist system of the past. But behind closed doors, the Lord's visitation transfigured these heads into a glorious transformation that was seen in the spirit. Mighty submissions as kings came to their knees against the threat of nuclear war. Of course, as all these heads of the beast were known in the book of Revelations to come to a mighty stance and then suddenly wounded. The woundings of Christ to bring them to a new apparition where the beast is said to suddenly remove one image and come back to marvelously be present again. The many transformations of prodigals coming to a height of pride and then judged at the cross, coming to a new height of command and then judged at the cross. The final apparition is known. Publicly behind closed doors, there has been a declaration of peace, an agreement with the ancient blood of Christ, and a sudden transfiguration in the east, as there has been even known in spirit, now revealed from Christ, these things have happened. Looking for public evidence of these events, I see Putin holding up a draft of peace towards Ukraine, submitted to Nigeria's request. I also see in Iran a sudden move from Hezbollah's reign against Jews to a pledge from the Prince of Iran, standing in public declaration on YouTube with his hand pledged against the wall with Jews waiting for the return of the Lord. Now you understand there are many realms of peace. And as you know, these realms of peace are becoming public notice. To agree with the transfiguration of the globe, come in alignment with the pledge of peace and the covenants of wars that have ended in peace in this nation, such as the Revolutionary War, the Civil War that was complete with the compact of the freedom of slaves, and the union that it brought. If you agree with the peace of these covenants, then you're agreeing with the sealed blood that was always the manifestation of Christ's blood that sealed these documents and covenants, meaning no more repeat of war and no more need to look for it to happen again. As God has been revisiting covenants in this land, we ultimately know sudden destruction could come, meaning World War III. But if you agree with the Revolutionary War Compact and the peace that we had with the nation here in our agreement made to settle peace with Britain, now you know we are no longer facing World War. And if you were concerned about any turn of events, such as civil war in this land, just agree with the freedom that black people were given. The pledge of peace towards them means they are free men, no longer needing to be under the prejudiced command of white people, just as equal citizens as they always have been, meaning they have the right to presidency as Barack Obama declared. And of course, he was a marvelous declaration of that completion of the movement of the 60s. As you know, history has always pledged peace. And if you agree with the peace in the blood, now you're agreeing with the peace of Israel. The seated Christ, now with the blood in his veins, declaring peace through the blood of all tribes, united back in him. God bless you from Israel, locally here now and live. Submitted to you today as the voice of prophecy and the declaration of Christ.
Thank you so much for joining us for CBN News Watch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, the impact on Israel of the surprising deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. The two Middle Eastern powers agreed to reestablish diplomatic relations and reopen embassies after 7 years of tensions. Why some say it should be a wake-up call for the Biden administration. And how Israel was caught off guard by the announcement. We'll bring you the story from Jerusalem. Here in the U.S., federal regulators extraordinary steps to stop a potential banking crisis after the historic failure of Silicon Valley Bank.
We are concerned about depositors and are focused on trying to meet their needs.
Why their action may have prevented runs on other banks.
Essentially has ceded some important ground, an important area for U.S. stability and security to China to some degree. The administration was caught flat-footed. It's hard to tell, but they ought to pay much closer attention now and work with the region, in particular Saudi Arabia, to be a part of it and not pivot away from it.
Hannah recently visited Saudi Arabia and met with its top leaders. He says Saudi is hedging its bets. CBN News asked Greenblatt what this means for Israel.
But I think Israel needs to take a very, very close watch at this. Them too. I don't know if they were caught flat-footed here, but I think that rather than blaming within Israel whose fault this is, I think they need to look forward and figure out how do they protect Israel and how do they further integrate Israel into the security architecture of the Middle East.
Despite this deal, Greenblatt remains bullish on the Abraham Accords and believes it's still possible Saudi Arabia could join.
I am still very optimistic. As I mentioned, I travel there a lot, and with each passing trip, I'm just sort of amazed at what's happening on the ground, in particular in Saudi Arabia. So I'm very, very optimistic. And I think we can look to the UAE to understand a country that has recognized a way to be close with Israel, develop strong ties with Israel, do significant business, and have security cooperation with Israel, while at the same time being realistic and understanding that Iran is also part of the region, and they can have ties with Iran while at the same time as having ties with Israel.
How will this agreement with Iran affect Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accord peace deals involving Israel?
Well, first of all, Ephraim, it necessarily doesn't eliminate the prospect of a relationship between Saudi Arabia and Israel and the Saudis joining the Abraham Accords. You would think that maybe on first blush, but to join the Accords, the Saudis want a relationship restored between themselves and the U.S. They actually made that clear last Thursday, just before this announcement on Friday. Now, the UAE is an example of what a Gulf nation can do. They can develop strong ties with Israel economically, even militarily, and yet they can still have diplomatic relations with Iran. So the Abraham Accords are not over. It's just not part of this conversation. We'll see if Benjamin Netanyahu, which was a goal of his, can try to get the Saudis into the Abraham Accords.
Why was the deal brokered in China? Have the Saudis lost trust in the United States because of the Biden administration?
Well, a couple of things, Ephraim. First of all, since, as we saw in our story, the U.S. has stepped away from the Middle East in many ways, and they've alienated Saudi Arabia. And sort of that's why China has stepped in. They've filled a vacuum that's left by the U.S., and it really is a wake-up call by the Biden administration to work with Saudi Arabia. What this agreement does in terms of geopolitics, it relieves the pressure on the Iranians and then having China usurp the historic role of the U.S. in the region. And this is something the U.S. had historically, and now China is getting in there. What they're doing is simply taking care of their own interests. They're trying to protect and preserve their own future. And one more motivation, Ephraim, for Saudi Arabia is their pursuit of what they call Vision 2030. It's an initiative to transform the country from dependence on oil to one based on tourism and innovation. And for this to succeed, they really need calm between themselves and Iran, and find out how Israel can protect itself and be part of the regional security infrastructure.
Again, there's so much nervousness right out there when you speak to investors and when you speak to the markets. Give me a sense of what you would be able to do or to give to normalize a relationship with Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia, I think, is one of the exceptional things that tells you why I'm very optimistic about Israel. Really one of two reasons, one of two main reasons. One is that well, I'll start with Saudi Arabia, but then I'll get with the other one. Yeah. I think that we're about to witness a pivot of history. But first, there is an economic corridor of energy, transport, and communications that naturally goes through our geography, from the Arabian Peninsula, from Asia to the Arabian Peninsula to Europe. We're going to realize that. Yeah. And by the way, my sense is we're going to realize that despite whether we have formal peace.
But do you have to give concessions? So we understand Saudi Arabia. So what would you give? Would you limit, for example, Jewish settlements?
But do I think it's feasible to have that? And do I think that political questions will block it? I doubt it. If there's political will, there'll be a political way to achieve normalization and a formal peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia.
But, Prime Minister,
that has enormous economic consequences for your investors. And if they have to bet on it right now, I'd bet on it.
Okay, so if you look at, for example, giving the Palestinians their own state, is that something that you would, is that a red line?
It won't be their own state. It'll be an Iranian-controlled state. I said often is that the way that I would have a solution is two things about that. One, that the Palestinians should have all the powers to govern themselves and none of the powers to threaten Israel. This means that in whatever final settlement, peace settlement we have with the Palestinians, Israel remains I would say Israel has the overriding security power in the entire area, ours and theirs.
And the latest headline involves Syria and Saudi Arabia. They are re-establishing diplomatic ties, and Russia is said to be brokering the deal. Earlier this month, Iran and Saudi Arabia came together, and China claimed to have brokered that deal. So two major developments. It seems peace is coming to West Asia. The significance of this for the region and the world cannot be overstated. Let's tell you what happened yesterday. Reports said Syria and Saudi Arabia were resuming ties.
A source in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs revealed to Al Ikhbariya that ongoing talks have started with the Syrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In a comment on what was circulating by some international media, the source said that within the kingdom's keenness to facilitate necessary consular services to the people, a discussion is underway between officials in the kingdom and their counterparts in Syria about resuming the provision of consular services.
The deal is still work in progress. It's expected to be sealed. He's done so with the help of Russia. Recently, he visited Moscow, and there he spoke about the need to rebalance the world order.
Our stance doesn't only stem from the strong friendship that we have, nor does it stem from the loyalty you have shown us. Our stance comes from the world's need today for rebalance.
The Russians want to play peacemakers, and the Syrians may be able to end their global isolation. Basically, it suits everyone. Al-Assad has been traveling. He visited the UAE and Oman. They made it look like a post-earthquake outreach. You know, apart from Turkey, Syria also suffered because of the quakes last month, and the Arabs are now giving humanitarian assistance. But this was also a way to re-induct Assad into the international fold. And Saudi Arabia is leading this front, this effort. Its foreign minister said there is growing consensus that Syria should be brought back into the Arab League.
Well, thank you very much. This is very important. This is a big event, and I want to just congratulate all of the people standing behind me because they have done an incredible job. This is something that hasn't been done in more than 25 years. Just a few moments ago, I hosted a very special call with two friends, Prime Minister Benjamin Netianyahu of Israel and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed of the United Arab Emirates, where they agreed to finalize a historical peace agreement. Everybody said this would be impossible. And as you know, Mohammed is one of the great leaders of the Middle East. After 49 years, Israel and the United Arab Emirates will fully normalize their diplomatic relations. They will exchange embassies and ambassadors and begin cooperation across the board and on a broad range of areas, including tourism, education, healthcare, trade, and security. This is a truly historic moment. Not since the Israel-Jordan peace treaty was signed more than 25 years ago has so much progress been made towards peace in the Middle East. By uniting two of America's closest and most capable partners in the region, something which said could not be done, this deal is a significant step towards building a more peaceful, secure, and prosperous Middle East. Now that the ice has been broken, I expect more Arab and Muslim countries will follow the United Arab Emirates lead, and I want to just thank them for being. It's not surprising, knowing Mohammed so well, it's not surprising they are in that lead position, and normalize relations with Israel. We are already discussing this with other nations, very powerful, very good nations, and people that want to see peace in the Middle East. So you will probably see others of these, but this is the first one in more than 25 years. This deal will allow much greater access to Muslims from throughout the world to visit the many historic sites in Israel, which the Muslims want to see very badly and have wanted to see for many, many decades. And my first trip as president was to Saudi Arabia in May of 2017, and my speech to the assembled leaders of 54 Muslim countries. Every single one was by their leader, their number one leader. It was an amazing, really an incredible event, very important event. I made clear that the problems of the Middle East can only be solved when people of all faiths come together and pursue economic opportunity for people of all faiths. And when you look at what's happening, you're seeing a lot of progress is being made that nobody thought could possibly be made. And things are happening that I can't talk about, but they're extremely positive. I want to thank the leaders of Israel and the UAE for their courage and for their leadership to forge this tremendous agreement. Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, shortly after I win the presidency, I will have the horrible war between Russia and Ukraine settled, and we'll do it quickly. We'll do it quickly. Know them both very well. We'll get it done fast. I know all the players I deal with them, and I dealt with them very successfully, and they respected your president, and they respected your country.
There are many skeptics about this agreement, but it is a significant diplomatic moment. So no wonder this White House, adept at putting on a show on the South Lawn, was celebrating the occasion as a triumph for President Trump. Its historic grievances dismissed. Rather, they were signing a normalization agreement between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain.
We're here this afternoon to change the course of history. After decades of division and conflict, we mark the dawn of a new Middle East. Thanks to the great courage of the leaders of these three countries, we take a major stride toward a future in which people of all faiths and backgrounds live together in peace and prosperity.
This peace will eventually expand to include other Arab states, and ultimately, it can end the Arab-Israeli conflict once and for all. To all of Israel's friends in the Middle East, those who are with us today and those who will join us tomorrow, I say, Assalamu alaikum. Peace unto thee.
Childhood cancer it's a long road. It's hard.
Es una noticia que pues ningún papá espera.
I didn't know babies could have cancer. Basically, your worst nightmare come to life. We thought we were losing our daughter, and then when we came to St. Jude, everything changed.
I know St. Jude is the reason that I'll have my son now and into the future. The goal is that these children live and that they can thrive for the rest of their lives, and I'm just thankful for that.
11 years that I've been in remission, and St. Jude was my hero, so I was like, let me be someone else's hero.
Es posible que un problema tan horrible como el cáncer infantil nos traiga a todos juntos. De hecho, ocurre esto cada día aquí en St. Jude.
I believe we should take our purpose, mission, like St. Jude, and we should help other people. And St. Jude has always been about helping other people.
I want to be a part of this. I want to be able to spread the word, to support as much as I can.
And it warms your heart because you know you're helping somebody in need.
It really is inspiring to know that we have people that are out there fighting for us so that we can fight for these kids.
El regalo más grande que St. Jude me ha dado es poder ver crecer a mi hijo.
Let's cure childhood cancer.
Together.